It is now early July, and that means the small scale multi unit housing initiative or Multiplex Plan is in effect. To bring us up to date on how each municipality has adopted the legislation and maybe which ones are holding back a bit, we have Bill Laidler with us. Bill is a multifamily developer with over 500 doors under construction, and Bill is on the forefront of the small scale multi unit housing initiative and not only has his own projects underway, but is also on the forefront of educating realtors, builders, and investors on the Multiplex Plan, helping people target the best properties to buy and build on and which ones to avoid. Bill actually joined us back in February, where we had an initial discussion about this plan, and that video has become the highest viewed of all time on our channel. Clearly, there is an appetite for understanding this new legislation and how it's going to affect the housing crisis in BC. So welcome back to the show, Bill. We're very excited to have you here.
Thank you, Dan. Ryan, appreciate the opportunity. It's an exciting time in real estate and happy to share everything that we've discovered through the deep dive into multiplexes.
Fantastic. Really appreciate your time here. So let's dive right into the questions here. And the first one is, Bill, where are we in the process for cities implementing this provincial mandate to allow the 4 to 6 units on what was formerly single family zoned properties?
The province announced the mandates in December of 2023, requiring cities in Metro Vancouver and across BC to implement their new zoning bylaws by June 30th of 2024. Today being July 4th, majority of cities have implemented their new zoning bylaw and building permits can be applied for across the region. There have been some cities who have delayed or requested for extensions to this deadline with the province, and other cities who are working through what can be considered a loophole to try to avoid implementing the multiplexes in their cities. And then on the other far side of the city graph is the cities who are completely adopting the provincial recommendations and allowing for us to move straight to building permit as of earlier this week.
So Bill, tell us again then specifically, which cities does this apply to?
The provincial mandates require every city that has an urban containment boundary to implement between 4 and 6 units per property. In the Greater Vancouver area, we have Metro Vancouver's urban containment boundary that runs from West Vancouver in the North Shore down to Delta and Tsawwassen and out to Abbotsford. It includes all of the Tri-Cities, Maple Ridge, and Mission. With the Metro Vancouver urban containment boundary, all of the cities must adopt the multiplex zoning. Outside of the Metro Vancouver urban containment boundary, there's more flexibility for cities to set their own urban containment boundaries. But for now, the cities that are within Metro Vancouver were mandated to allow these additional units.
Yeah, great to know, Bill. And so without ultimately maybe getting political here, and knowing that Metro Vancouver essentially has a housing crisis, a housing shortage, what's your take on maybe why some municipalities are pushing back on allowing density?
The idea of a housing shortage or a housing crisis, I like to qualify with, we have a family-orientated housing crisis. We have lots of condo buildings. We have lots of land for unlimited condo buildings. But what we're really lacking in Metro Vancouver is a front door, a backyard, and 3 bedrooms for a local family who was born and raised in our community to grow their family in our community. And that's what this provincial announcement is allowing for. We're allowing for townhouses on formerly single-family properties that allow for more families to stay closer to their parents, to their old family home, and in the neighborhoods that they grew up in.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess with that then, do you expect builders and developers to start moving away from single family and start, I guess, creating more of the what's been dubbed missing middle?
100%. And we're not just seeing builders moving away from single family. We're also seeing developers like myself moving away from condo developments into the multiplex zoning. And there's 2 main reasons for this. The single family builders, as much as they want to build single family, they're always a risk building a product that they have to sell for between $3 and $5 million that's unaffordable to most in the city, that there's a large risk to holding that property if it doesn't sell. Construction mortgages are north of $1.5 million to $3 million, carrying costs from $10,000 to $20,000, $30,000 a month to hold these spec single family builds. And if they don't get sold, have significant strain on cash flow and profitability. So the single family builders are looking at these multiplexes as an opportunity to decrease their gross sale prices, de-risking the projects and opening up the marketplace to the local purchasers who can afford to buy in that $1 million to $1.5 million price point. That's the single family side of the equation. Then you have the multifamily developers like myself who have gone through cycles of 7 to 8 years to get one project approved and out of the ground. It's way too slow to be in that space, even if we wanted to. If I did another project today, I'm 36 years old, I wouldn't be 43 until that one was completed.
That's a long time.
The housing shortage is a challenge, but for myself as a business model, a 7-year time horizon is not an exciting business for me. Multiplexes that skips all the red tape, lets us bring more creative product to market faster, is where we're starting to redirect our resources as well.
Bill, just to kind of elaborate a little bit on that, when we look at, say, the city of Vancouver, for example, who can allow up to 8 units to get built, which would be rental purpose in that respect. Why is it from your perspective that we have sort of 0 applications for those 8 units that are rentals versus, say, the 4 or 6 where we're going to see, strata unit sales and things like that?
There's a couple of reasons. Number one, that the rents, the cost of construction and the cost of land is becoming so high that it's even difficult to make strata developments work.
Wow.
Rents don't rise as fast or aren't as high in comparison to what strata values are, what units are selling for. So the rents just aren't covering the costs. I would love to have rental projects. We would love to build more rental. We would love to have long-term assets, but if the rents don't cover the cost, we can't build them. That's the first challenge. The second challenge with building rental is you have to build spec rental. So for example, through Dan and the agents that we work with, we're developing an 8-unit multiplex in Burnaby. If we were going down the rental route, we would have to build that $13 million project. And at the end of the project, once it's complete, hope we get the rents that would cover the mortgages. On the strata side, we're able to pre-sell, which means before we start taking draws on a construction loan, we know we have buyers in place, reducing the risk of the project and allowing us to move into those construction loans with more confidence.
Yeah, because one of the things I mentioned to Dan on our last podcast was that one of the things I don't think we need more of are condo rentals. We need homes that people can live in. We need homes that they don't, every 3 or 4 years need to move out of or move up in and pay a whole new whack of property transfer tax. And then, just the affordability issue just grows and grows and grows. And, it seems to me like the only kind of group that benefits from this is really the government and the taxes that get paid as a result of that. Even developers, like yourself, you're not all that interested in building condos right now because it doesn't solve the problem. Anyhow, with that said, let's talk a little bit. You mentioned here how we're expecting builders and developers to start moving away from single family construction and into multiplex. What do you think the biggest positive that we have seen in relation to this process is going to be?
The biggest positive that we have seen is skipping the politicization of housing. We are no longer concerned about how big the building is or how many units. That has been settled by the province, and that discussion is being skipped in the development permit application process. We still have flexibility within each city where they can define the form and character of these multiplexes, so that they can have some design guidelines and control about how they look in each neighborhood. But we no longer have to go in front of mayor and council who have to be reelected in the next election and are concerned about local neighborhood groups who are going to oppose the number of units, the size of the units coming into these neighborhoods. The biggest benefit is that 2.5, 3-year process is being skipped, and we're moving to the end, the development permit or building permit process. Now, for anyone who's interested in what these processes look like city by city, we're hosting an event on July 18th at 1 o'clock with the Burnaby mayor, who's going to talk about the multiplex opportunity in Burnaby, and we're going to give away the city by city cheat sheet on all the processes and how they're being adopted by each city in Metro Vancouver. If you're watching this after July 18th, find a way to get in contact with Dan, Ryan, or myself, and we'll look to distribute that cheat sheet for you, because the devil is in the details in terms of which cities are adopting these policies in a beneficial way and which cities are deferring them into more bureaucracy and complications.
Yeah, great event by the sounds of it. So definitely reach out if you want to know how to get tickets to that. So being on the forefront here, Bill, like you just mentioned, there are obviously some upsides to it. But trailblazers, I'm sure, also get to uncover some of the landmines along the way too. What are maybe some of the drawbacks or negatives you found or uncovered so far about this new process and initiative?
The two biggest challenges remain city fees, which also include Metro Vancouver fees, and offsite servicing costs, which is completely fair. If we're going to put more housing in traditionally single-family neighborhoods that has sewer, water, storm lines from the 1950s, 60s, 70s, there needs to be planning in place to allow for water and discharge to be serviced for each property. The cost of that is being borne by the developer. And when the developer has to bear the cost, it needs to be discounted off the land price, so that if the cost is too high of those city fees and offsite infrastructure, the value we can pay to a homeowner drops below what they could sell it for on the open market, and then will cause a lack of development starts to happen.
Does it seem also, though, a bit, Bill, that there might be a bit of a cash grab here? And, hard to say. I don't spend city money, but you see new fees coming out of what seems like the blue. And then you see these 400% increases over the next 3 years for some of these fees. Like, from the outside looking in, it can seem like a cash grab. What's kind of your take on this?
It's a large amount of money. We're looking at, in Burnaby, $58,000 per door, plus potentially another $30,000 to $40,000 per door for the Metro Vancouver fees. In addition to that, which is totaling $400,000 or $500,000, we may be hit with another $200,000 to $300,000 or $400,000 of offsite upgrades, not including those fees. There could be $1 million worth of fees and offsite upgrades per project. Painful. But I always go back to when I was developing Sitka House. It's a 100-unit condo building in Port Moody. I was about my 4th year in, banging my head against the wall, and I said, I'm done. I'm moving to Texas. I flew down. I looked at some properties in Texas, found a site that I liked, and then I asked the realtor what was next door. And he said, it's just a massive vacant 10-acre parcel. And what can be built there? No zoning. They could build whatever they want there. No controls, no zoning, private infrastructure. And I came back and I'm not convinced that that's the right way either. Right? Privatized infrastructure and unlimited building potential. What would that happen to our marketplace? One of the good things about living in Greater Vancouver is we do have appreciation for the oceans. We do have beautiful mountains and trees. And there is some control over the type of housing that we have. So do I think we have it right today with all the cash grabs and money that's coming out of each project? No. But do we want to unlimit it so that it's all privatized? Probably not either. Where are we, or where should we be in that pendulum is a very, very difficult question to answer.
It sounds like to me you'd end up with a lot of potential private interests that might not benefit the city or benefit the users of the city in that respect, rather benefiting a very small group of people that could have long-term implications. And, I'm kind of with you on that, Bill. I believe some regulation is a good thing. It kind of puts the good actors, if you will, on a super speedway to get this stuff done, and kind of boxes out some of maybe the bad actors as well. But kind of going back to what you were mentioning here with respect to some of these big drawbacks, and it sounds like cost, city fees are some of the big ones here. And it's an important thing, I think, for homeowners to understand, because, I'm getting inundated with questions about the multiplex plan, and everybody believes, now that they can build 6 units on their home, that it's suddenly worth so much more money. But maybe let's bring some perspective here. So, what should homeowners do if they think their property actually has that development potential? What's the first step? Where should they go?
First step is to call yourself and Dan. I've been working with Dan now for at least 6 months. Dan is one of the most knowledgeable real estate agents on properties with development potential. Through our working relationship, Dan can provide the homeowner a feasibility study that will help estimate revenues, give an idea of what builders are paying for hard costs, soft costs, offsite servicing, and what effect that has on the residual land value. Not all properties are more profitable in multiplex, but for the ones that are, there is still big jumps. So it's important for every homeowner to find a realtor who can understand a residual land pro forma and can estimate what development property is worth in today's market.
Yeah, because I think when you have a better understanding of what these costs are, like you said, a potentially $1 million nut that you've got to deal with before you even put a shovel in the ground, we're talking about, like you said, we're having to discount the land price, because if you just tack it on, nobody's going to be able to afford to buy this stuff. And as a result of that, nothing will get built.
For some properties, yes, definitely. But let's just take an 8,000 square foot lot. If you had an 8,000 square foot lot and previously you could only build a single family home, and let's take the Burnaby area, that single family home would sell for somewhere in that $3.5 million range. You can now take that 8,000 square foot lot and put 6 townhouse units on it. At a minimum, those townhouse units will sell for $1 million each. You now have $6 million of revenue on that same piece of property. A $2.5 million jump in revenue from 3.5 to 6. That $2.5 million is going to get distributed. It is going to get distributed to the city for city fees. It's going to get distributed for offsite upgrades, additional building costs. But there also is left over for the homeowner that will cause values to jump in most situations. Not all situations, and that's why you have to have the right realtor. But in many situations, there will be a bump in land values.
Yeah, definitely. We've run some pro formas that definitely speak to that, but then a bunch that speak to the opposite, where ultimately your land may be worth more to an end user. So it's really important to understand both, and definitely don't just believe every flyer that comes through your door that your property is worth double. That's for sure.
It's increased the value of the real estate agent substantially.
Yeah, agreed.
Every residential realtor now has to have commercial real estate training. And if the residential realtor does not have commercial real estate training, and they're just going off what your neighbor's house sold for, you're risking missing you're missing hundreds of thousands of dollars, potentially, if your realtor doesn't understand what the development potential is. Maybe millions if it's a large enough property, but definitely there can be a couple $100,000 swing.
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing it happen already, and we know people within the course are just grabbing up properties right now where that listing agent does not understand the inherent value, and they're potentially losing their clients significant upside potential here. Well, let's shift a bit here to talking about all this potential inventory that's coming to market. We've got 150 odd development permits in with the city of Vancouver alone so far. That's going to turn into 600-700 units. How much of this legislation, of the plan, of the inventory that's coming is going to help with pricing, let's just say?
My guess is as good as anybody else's. My personal belief is that Vancouver is one of the most beautiful cities in the world. As transportation increases, as remote work increases, virtual communication increases, more and more people are going to want to be in Vancouver. And if we wanted to be a $10 million or a 10 million person city, 10 million people from around the world would come move to Vancouver. We're on a global market and we're competing not against townhomes in Vancouver. We're competing against prices in New York, London, San Francisco, Asia, where they're substantially higher than ours. So I don't think we can ever have gross prices drop, but what we can have is more options for housing locally. So we can have more families stay here and be able to afford a $1 million townhouse or $1.5 million townhouse or multiplex. Will it drop? I don't think so. But there will be more opportunities for more people to live here and live in the type of housing that they're looking for.
Maybe not lose some of that brain drain down south and other places where they're getting a better quality of life in many ways. And I think I remember when you were on our last podcast, you asked a really interesting question that had me thinking for weeks after that was, we've never really asked the question of how big do we want Vancouver to be? Like what are we building towards with the, and I don't know if that existential question has ever really been answered. And I think that's critical to understanding real estate values, especially real estate and zoning changes into the future, because it's all connected in that respect, I would imagine.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you recognizing that. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about it as well. And it's okay for us to say, you know what, we want to plan a city that's going to be 5 million people or 7 million people by 2050. And let's create some great amenities, some really nice park spaces, and design the city in a way that works for that population growth, rather than sometimes at times it's just building for the idea of affordability, which seems like it's a misguided rationale for the housing.
Yeah, it's as if you're putting the emphasis on the means and not the end, right? Which if you continuously look at the means, you're never going to build towards the end. Anyhow, with that said, let's move on to talking about taxes here, because this is another big issue, I think, for a lot of homeowners, especially understanding now that their single-family home has significant redevelopment potential. So with homeowners that are in the TOAs, who are potentially sitting on much higher land values and expecting to see a huge increase in their property taxes year over year. I mean, is it going to change this year now that this is out, or is it next year? I mean, the city fees that we're seeing for development seem to be growing at a tremendous rate. Are we going to see that reflected in property taxes too?
Let's break this down into a couple of layers. So first off, for anybody who isn't aware yet, a TOA is a transit-oriented area. There were 104 transit-oriented areas identified by the province where they want to see condos constructed. This includes SkyTrain stations, major bus exchanges, and West Coast Express. There's radiuses between 400 and 800 meters from those TOAs that mandate condos from 8 stories to 20 stories. The question regarding property taxes requires some understanding of how property taxes are calculated. One major misconception is that when property taxes rise, it's purely because the city's budget rose, which isn't directly the case. Property taxes are tied to the BC assessments. So the city has an overall budget for how much tax they need to collect, and the higher valued properties pay a higher proportionate share of those taxes. When the TOAs get designated, the valuation by BC assessment is on their highest and best use, which causes, on many cases, those valuations to be higher once the land sales happen in those neighborhoods. So let's take the example. It was BC assessment for $2 million a residential home. Now it's $4 million in the TOA because the land assembly happened across the street. What's happened is their proportionate share of the city taxes has rose. They are now worth $4 million. So instead of taking a $2 million share of the city tax burden, they are now taking a $4 million share of the city tax burden, which is actually decreasing the tax burden on other neighborhoods, assuming that there was no increase in the budget. So there's not more taxes being collected by the cities. the people in the TOA areas, because their values have jumped, they're taking on a higher percentage of that tax contribution.
And for clarification, Bill, you said upon a sale. Does it not trigger automatically with this sort of new zoning, or like what has to transpire for the higher tax bill to be expected?
I don't know for sure, but the best that I understand is that the BC Assessment Authority values based on comparable land sales. BC Assessment does not value based on residual land value. Residual land value would tell you what your value is worth at your highest potential today and what a developer could pay for it. My understanding is BC Assessment waits until there's actually land sales that transact and then base your value on concrete information of what has sold in the marketplace. So there is a lag between when the OCPs are updated or the TOAs in this situation and when those land sales are closed. And then once they're closed, BC Assessment knows the true value price per land square foot, and then we'll redistribute that to all the other properties in that same land use designation.
Perfect. Thanks for clarifying. So it's early days here still, understandably, but I want to hear your thoughts on, is 4 to 6 units enough? Like they're trying to bring density. Should they have gone, every property, you can now go up to 10 or 15 or whatever the case may be. But you know what I mean? I feel like it's a great step in the right direction. Should they have thought further along the road, or should they have thought bigger out of the gate here?
It's a great question. It's a great question. It goes back to what we were talking about. Is what is the purpose of zoning? Why are we restricting to 4 to 8 units? If you have a 3,000 square foot property and you can put 4 units on it, we're back to 800 square foot condos. If you have a 30,000 square foot property and you put 4 units on there, you still have 9,000 square foot mega homes. Like, what is the goal here? Like, what are we trying to achieve? And yes, we're in a step in the right direction, but sometimes letting the creativity of the marketplace and the developers bring the product to market that the market wants, and not pigeonholing us into a bylaw that's adopted across the province with less flexibility. Now, like you said, we have stepped in the right direction. We went from 1 home per property to removing that restriction and opening up or deregulating single family zoning to at least to 4. But should we be going further? Maybe you just restrict it by unit size. You say you can build as many as you want as long as they're 1,300 square foot 3 bedrooms. Put them in a condo building, put them in a townhouse building, put them in a rancher, whatever you want. The goal is to have more family style units, and we don't care how many you have as long as they're family style.
Yeah, because I mean,
Laidler for Premier.
It's funny because when you go around the world, and much like you talked about, Vancouver is competing with other major cities, not just in Canada, but around the world. So if you go to places like New York, or you go to places like Europe, and you look at how they have housing designated there, it's far more condensed, right? And you're seeing a lot of row homes. You're seeing like asset classes that we don't even have here. And so, I often wonder, much like Dan does, if the multiplex plan is a good start, but in many ways, it may not have gone far enough to address the housing crisis that we talk about. And like you've said in this podcast, we don't need more condos. We need more alternative housing that allows families to grow and stay in the neighborhoods.
It's interesting.
Amazing. Well, look, Bill, this has been very informative, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners and viewers are going to have a lot more questions, and understandably, some are definitely going to want to attend the event with the Mayor of Burnaby. What is the best way to get a hold of you or to this event?
Look for the tickets, www.laidleracademy.com/Hurley, HURLEY. I want to say thank you to Mayor Hurley for being part of that event and for sharing his wisdom on how Burnaby is adopting the multiplex zoning. Otherwise, we have a number of other programs. If you're a homeowner, realtor, investor, developer, and you want to learn more about multiplex, we have a 6-week intensive. The next group is launching in September. Dan and 19 others are about to complete the first group here in the next 2 weeks. So that's the deep dive in terms of understanding everything you need to know about development potential in the multiplex, from acquisition to pricing to feasibility studies, equity raising, everything you need to know to bring you from single family zoning to development permit approval.
Amazing. We will be sure to include all those links below. And as this evolves, we'd love to have you back in maybe another 6 months, because it is quite fascinating. And we are literally changing the landscape of our province here. And people want to be on the forefront of how they can best capitalize or at least understand what's happening. And of course, where to avoid those landmines. So, Bill, final words are with you.
I just want to congratulate both you and Dan and Ryan. You both are investing into your business to understand what's happening in terms of property rights, valuations for homeowners. And it's just great to see the amount of work that you're putting into this and the quality of service that you're providing in the marketplace. So happy to be in business with you and happy to support as much as I can moving forward.
Thank you. Well, we obviously appreciate you immensely and look forward to continuing growing our businesses together. And as always, thank you for tuning in, watching, and listening, and we will catch you here next week.